I go to college on one side of the city, although I live on the complete opposite side. Because of this, I have to use public transportation quite often. Mostly, this means I use the subway system. It's great actually, because I'm able to get around easily, and I really have no desire to live in the area that my campus is in anyway. I never have problems on the subway, and despite the reputation that subway systems get, they really are generally safe. The only scary thing that's ever happened to me on the subway happened during my junior year of college. I had a really important paper that was due, so after classes I would go down to the library for some peace and quiet. Before I knew it though, it was already after midnight. I had to head on home to get some sleep. Now, this was not the first time I ever rode the subway that late at night. I wasn't really worried about anything happening. It was common for a homeless person to ride the subways at night often, as a place to sleep or settle down for a bit. More than anything else though, those kind of people were fairly obvious. They were always laying down and sleeping while I was sitting on the train though, and didn't seem to pose much a bother to anyone other than taking up some space. This time though, while I was sitting on the train, a man stepped through the far door from the other car. He was walking towards the end of the car that I was sitting at. He had a Bible in his hand and seemed to be reading some verse from it very loudly. I don't really know enough about the Bible though to know what exactly he was quoting, but it was something about being born again. I didn't really think too much of it. It wasn't that unusual to see someone preaching on the subway. What was unusual though was when the guy stepped through the door to go into the next car, I turned around to make sure he was gone. Only I saw he was just standing at the window of the door, giving me the most sinister look I'd ever seen in my life. When I looked back, rather than avert his gaze, he just stood there and kept on glaring daggers at me. I was the one to break eye contact with him first. I just went back to reading my book and tried to ignore that unpleasant feeling. I didn't look back around, but somehow I could still feel his eyes on me. When I finally got to my stop, I hurried off the train. Much to my chagrin though, he got out of the subway from a different car and immediately began following me. I tried to pretend that I didn't see this as I hurried to get out of the station. Once we were out though, he still kept following me, turning down every street I turned down. I had never been that scared before in my entire life. Fortunately though, I was able to get to my apartment building before he caught up with me. I opened the lobby door and hurried inside. I tried to close the door behind me quickly. However, before I could latch it, the man shoved his arm inside. I told the guy I knew he did not live there, and if he didn't leave me alone right now, I would call the cops. In what seemed like a very sincere voice, the man told me that all he wanted to do was make sure I had been saved. I responded that I was an atheist, and I just wanted to be left alone. "An atheist," he responded in a condescending voice. "You know you'll be going to hell when you die, right?" I told him I didn't believe in hell, and I wasn't scared of going somewhere that didn't exist. At that moment, the man reached into his jacket with his other hand and pulled out a blade. "I bet you're scared right now," he said to me. "I bet you're scared that I'm gonna send you straight to hell." He struggled with the door, trying to get it open, or at least get his hand with the knife through. He wasn't able to open it any further though. I wasn't able to completely fend him off either though, so we were kind of stuck in a dangerous stalemate. What the hell is going on here? I heard someone call out from behind me. For a moment I was startled, but one of my downstairs neighbors had come out into the lobby. He must have heard the commotion. "I've called the police, so if I was you, I'd get the hell out of here," he said to the homeless man. The homeless man stopped struggling, although he didn't immediately take his arm out of the door. After a moment, he thrust the blade back into his pocket and pulled his arm out of the doorway. He then took off running down the street. I thanked my neighbor, who revealed he actually hadn't had any time to call the cops at all. I didn't care though, as the bluff worked well. When I was a senior in college, I didn't have my own car. I really hated public transportation, but I got to ride free since I was a college student. Because of this, I often used it. Even so, crowded areas tend to really freak me out. So if I got out of class earlier in the day, I almost always waited until after rush hour to ride the bus home. I wasn't always able to do this, however. This one particular afternoon, I had to get home early. Honestly though, because of what happened at the bus stop, I can't even really remember what I had to get home early for. I was waiting for the bus, but when it pulled up, it was so crowded there was no way I could have gotten into it and been comfortable at all. A few others tried to squeeze their way on, but the majority of us at the stop didn't want to do that. It was rush hour, and there would be another bus coming by soon, certainly. If you ride public buses, you probably know that the bus isn't supposed to be in motion if anyone was standing in front of a line at the front. Well, there were several people packed into this area. The driver wasn't closing the doors. He demanded that some people get off the bus so he could finally take off and leave. It wasn't happening though. Nobody wanted to get off. I was worried about this because I saw the second bus was coming up soon. It may have appeared to the driver of the second bus that we were all still boarding, so we only stopped for a moment. Almost immediately, the second bus driver started back up and moved to go around the first bus. The lady beside me got tired of waiting, I guess. I assumed she went to walk to the subway station instead, so she started walking across the street in front of the bus stop. The very moment she stepped past that parked bus though, the woman was hit by the second bus that was just passing the first. It was such a shocking moment. I could literally feel the woman's blood splattering all over me. The shock of what I was seeing and what I was feeling was overwhelming. I feel bad even saying that though, because I wasn't the person who got hit. No matter how scary it was for me, it must have been a million times worse for her. The hit knocked the woman forward, and I watched in what seemed like slow motion as she slammed on the ground, then rolled over and over on the asphalt. I can't even describe how horrible it looked. I figure you probably don't want that description either. I immediately ran over to her to check if she was still alive. Despite how horrific she looked, thankfully she was. The bus driver stopped and got out pretty quickly. I was pushed behind a bunch of people who started tending to her. Fortunately for the woman, the bus had not been going at full speed, so she did survive the hit. For the longest time though, I always imagined her blood splattering over me every time I saw a bus coming down the road. It was a horrifying experience. I was taking the train home after a long day at work. Usually the trains are pretty crowded. I work a late second shift, however, so it was often nearly empty by the time I was going home. When I got on the train at my stop this day, I was able to find a car that was completely empty. I was grateful because I'd have a place to sit down and read until my stop in peace. A stop or two later though, another man climbed on board the train in my car. He went to the far side and sat down. Although I was happy he was sitting further away from me, I wasn't too happy that he sat down in a seat directly facing me. I became even less happy when I noticed he was just blatantly staring at me. As the train went on from start to finish, my ride home took approximately an hour or so. I was not looking forward to just sitting there with this weirdo looking at me the whole time. If you've ever been in a situation like this, you would know exactly how that feels. I didn't want to get up and move though, because I was afraid he would just get up and follow me. That would confirm that he was a creep. I tried to just read my book for a while, but it was really hard to concentrate with how intensely he was staring at me. I eventually looked up from my book when I saw that the guy had been moving around for a bit apparently. I looked up just in time to see him pull a rubber mask over his face. When he put his hands down, I noticed it was a leather face mask. You know, like the killer from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I was startled, but I tried not to let it show. I just looked back down at my book and tried to ignore him. I could see the guy if I only looked up a bit, so as long as I could take notice of him out of the corner of my eye, I would know if he was trying to do anything else. I told myself he was probably just some jackass trying to creep people out on the train, wanted to give me a little scare. I can't explain how creepy it was, though, that he just sat there in silence for the rest of the ride, just looking at me through the eye holes of the rubber mask. Each time I raised my eyes just a little, I would confirm that he was still staring at me. My stop just couldn't come quickly enough. When it was getting closer finally, I got out of my chair and hurried over to the exit. While I was standing there, as the train slowed down, I saw the guy get up and begin walking in my direction, still wearing that mask. I groaned, realizing he had more than enough time to get to the door and get off at my same stop. He was slowly walking toward the door, not in any great hurry it seemed. I just knew he was going to get off the train with me and try to follow me after. Do who knows what after that. I mean, maybe he was still just a jerk trying to scare me, but maybe he was a jerk who wanted to do more than just a scare. As the stop came, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. When I looked back into the car, I saw a conductor walking up to the man from behind. As the train came to a stop, the masked man turned around and took a swing at the conductor. As he did so, I saw two other conductors rush into the car behind him. The train stopped and the doors shot open. I hurried off the train as quickly as I could. I was just one guy. I was sure these three conductors could handle the creep. I made sure he was not trying to follow me off and got away from that train station as quickly as I could. I have no idea what happened after. My wife and I have one daughter together. I'm a professional writer, so I work from home. My wife is a project manager though, so she's gone throughout the day. This is pretty important to know for the dynamics of this story. This story happened on a bright spring day. My wife was already at work, and I wanted to get some lawn work done before I had to go to work myself. My daughter hated the noise of the lawnmower, so I put some cartoons on the TV for her while I went out to mow the lawn. There are only two doors to the house. One is in the front where I began mowing. The other entrance is in the back of the house from the kitchen. We never used that back door, except to sometimes take the garbage out. Usually it was kept chained and locked. Our living room had a huge picture window in it, so I was able to see inside to check on my daughter while I was pushing the lawnmower around. It got hot pretty quickly outside, and we all know that pushing a lawnmower in the hot sun can really take its toll on you. We had a decently big lawn as well, so I was starting to get a bit tired and thirsty. I thought I would take a break from mowing and turned it off. I then glanced over at the picture window to check on my daughter. Needless to say, I was shocked when I saw a huge man now standing in the window, looking right at me. He grabbed the drapes and pulled them closed. I was terrified for my daughter's safety. I immediately sprinted towards the house. I assumed whoever the guy was, he must have locked me out of the house already. The front door opened immediately, although the drapes on it were closed. When I got inside, the living room was empty. Neither my daughter nor the guy I saw were in there. I assumed they must have run out the back door. I sprinted into the kitchen, only to find the kitchen door was chained and locked as usual. Perplexed, I paused for a moment. I couldn't figure out for the life of me. Then I felt something touch my hand. I jumped up. It was my daughter. She asked me if I was done mowing the lawn already. I asked her in a panic where the man who had closed the drapes was. She was pretty confused and said she hadn't seen any man. She had in fact just gotten up to go to the bathroom a few minutes ago. Luckily, my daughter was okay and seemed to have missed the man. I called the police, who searched my house. They found nothing wrong with the back door, the chain, or the lock. The only way the man could have gotten both into and out of the house was through the front door. The police assumed he must have hidden from me while I was mowing the lawn, then snuck in while I wasn't looking. Then, when I went inside, he must have hidden from me and went out the front door while I burst into the kitchen in a panic. Now, I guess that's possible, but I'm not sure how to answer the question of how he got inside when I was in the front yard the entire time. Certainly a mystery, to be sure. I'm a really clean person. Although I take a shower every day and occasionally even twice a day, I really can't stand being wet. The absolute only way I can deal with the unpleasant feeling of being insulted with water is by keeping the water as hot as possible. I live alone in a really old house with a really old water heater. Because of this, the hot water doesn't always last as long as I'd like it to. The most disturbing thing that's ever happened to me happened a few years ago during a week in the winter. I was at work and we got hit by a snowstorm. Before leaving work, I had to shovel over a foot of snow off of, out from under, and from in front of my car. I was pretty sweaty because of this, an extremely gross feeling by that point. I was just dying to take a shower when I got home. I went over to the shower, and my hot water only lasted for a few moments. It was a pain in the ass, because when I felt it getting cold, I knew I had to wash up as quickly as possible and get out of there. The water was just way too cold. It wasn't completely unusual for this to happen sometimes, so I really didn't think that much about it. It was just an unlucky day for me. Unfortunately for me, the unluckiness continued throughout the week. The snow just kept coming and coming, and every day when I got home, I had to take a shower. My hot water would only last for a couple of minutes at most. I had to face the fact that the heater was probably getting too old to function properly, and I might have to replace it soon. I'm slightly handy myself, so I looked up some website information on water heaters. I decided to check the heater out myself on the weekend. I have one of those basements that's more like a cellar. It's only accessible from the outside, and the walls are all cinder blocks. The crawl space for the house is not completely blocked off either. After finding all the information I needed, I grabbed up some tools and went down to the basement. I really hated the lighting down there because it was only one single light bulb hanging down from the ceiling with a chain to turn it on. I had to walk down the stairs in the dark and fumble my way over to that single light. I pulled the chain to turn it on, and I screamed the moment the light turned on. I was looking directly at a man lying in the crawl space, staring at me. Terrified as anyone would have been, I ran back up the stairs as quickly as possible. I locked the door from the outside and headed to the house to call the police. It turned out the man had been living in my crawl space all winter. He had food and blankets and all sorts of things down there. I shuddered to think how much longer he would have been down there without me even knowing, had my water heater not spontaneously stopped working. I'm a bit up there in years, and I don't have any children of my own, so I don't know if this is still something parents do. If they do, I think they should be shot. My parents were not great parents, and whenever they didn't have the patience to deal with me, they would always scare me. They told me if I didn't behave or do my chores or basically anything that even slightly annoyed them, like going to bed on time, that the boogeyman would sneak into my bedroom while I was sleeping and drag me off to hell. Of course, when you're that young, it's easy to believe those sorts of things. That just makes it all the more terrifying. Whenever my parents brought up the boogeyman, I just knew I couldn't risk it. I quieted down a lot. That was probably my biggest mistake, because it just made them more likely to continue this in the future. Around the time I was 10 years old, I'd begun to hear noises coming from my closet at night. The first time it happened, I ran and told my parents that the boogeyman was in my closet. All they did was tell me I needed to go back to bed, where he would come out of the closet and drag me to hell that very night. I went back to bed, although it was a long time before I actually went to sleep. The following night, I heard the noises again. This time, I was determined not to go running to my parents. I really was convinced the boogeyman was in my closet, and I didn't want him to drag me to hell. When I heard a loud noise in the closet of things falling down, though, I left my bed and dashed towards my parents' room. The end result was the same as it had been the night before, so I stopped going to tell my parents about the noises, even though I heard them every single night. Each night I couldn't sleep until the noises stopped. Since I wasn't bothering my parents anymore, they just thought I was being well behaved. They allowed me to have a sleepover, and I invited my best friend Brent. I told him what had been going on. He thought it was all in my head, but he was willing to stay up and listen for me. Sure enough, that night, Brendan was in his sleeping bag when we both began hearing noises again. Brent nearly peed himself as we both ran out of the room. He confirmed to my parents that something really was going on in there. My dad finally decided to check it out. When he came to the room, he heard the noises in the closet too, only they weren't really coming from the closet. When he opened the door, nothing was there. The noises had been coming from the closet ceiling, which was right under our attic. For all his faults, my dad was a pretty tough guy who didn't mess around. He was also a hunter. He went and grabbed his shotgun rather than calling the police. He said it might just be an animal, and he wanted to be sure first. He made Brent and I go wait with my mom. While we waited downstairs in the living room, we heard one shot go off from the shotgun. This time, even my mom was afraid. After a few moments, we heard noises on the steps of the house coming down from the attic, then from the second floor. We froze, completely scared of what might be coming down the stairs. We saw first a man we had never seen before. It frightened us for sure. Then we saw, though, that his hands were tied up, and my dad was right behind him with the barrel of the shotgun at his back. He held him there while my mom called the cops. It turned out that this man had broken into our attic a month before and was living there. The shot we heard was my dad firing a warning shot. It also blew a hole in the ceiling that he had to fix up later. I often wonder, though, if my parents had never used this boogeyman nonsense to scare me, how much sooner would they have caught this guy?